If you had a Venn diagram, the helpful definition is to understand that grief, as the blue circle, isn't always traumatic. Sometimes grief is grief. And then there's trauma, and trauma doesn't always evoke grief. But in the center, there's an overlap, and that's traumatic grief. The best example that I can give you are two examples of clients I had. Both of them lost grandmothers during the time of our work together. They came to me initially because both of them lost children. One lost an older child and the other lost a younger child. And the first one, her grandmother died. She had very, very good palliative end-of-life care. She had cancer. She was in her late 80s. And she had a very, very good palliative care team. Pain was well controlled. She had her whole family there while she was dying. They had planned sort of her dying process. So they were playing her favorite music. The lights were dim. They had lit candles. Everyone was together, high cohesion in the family, crying and sad and grief-stricken indeed, because they love this person and she's dying. As far as deaths go, it was as peaceful and loving and tender as death could be. And so while the family was grieving, they didn't have trauma. Conversely, during the same period, I worked with another mother, grieving mother, whose grandmother also died, but someone broke into her grandmother's home, same age, to rob her and ended up murdering her. And that would be traumatic death. Because that's unexpected, even though the age bracket is the same, even though the relationship to the person is the same, the nature of how that grandmother died was traumatic. You don't expect your grandmother to be murdered. And so grief and trauma aren't always enmeshed, but at some point they can be in traumatic grief. In the literature, generally, we recognize traumatic grief as grief from the death of a child at any time, at any age, the death of a parent that's unexpected, that's sudden, and that's at a particularly difficult time in a child's life, the death of a partner or spouse unexpectedly and early, any type of homicide and any type of suicide are generally in Western culture considered traumatic. There we understand that there's grief and there's trauma and then there's traumatic grief. A lot of what we're going to be doing over the next 10 lessons covers everything. It'll cover grief, it'll cover trauma, and very specifically traumatic grief. This is important for all of us, and this is important for all of us for a lot of different reasons. The main reason is because it's the common human experience. It is the human experience that binds us all. Everyone at some point in his or her life will experience grief, will lose someone we love dearly and deeply. And we are not well versed in grief in our society. In fact, we don't even like really to talk about death or mortality. We're getting a little better about that. But grief is even more sort of taboo in our culture than death is. And so Irv Yalom, one of my favorite psychotherapists who ever lived, I'd like to share a quote with you from him from his book, Staring at the Sun. And he says, "In my work with clients, I strive for connectedness above all else. To that end, I am resolved to act in good faith. No uniforms or costumes, no parading of diplomas, professional degrees and awards, no pretense of knowledge I do not possess, no denying that existential dilemmas strike home for me as well. No refusal to answer questions, no hiding behind my role. And finally, no concealing my own humanness and vulnerability." And what Yalom is getting at there is the existential threat that faces us all. And that is certainly our own mortality, but even more than that, the mortality of the people we love deeply.